Welcome to another episode of Keeping It Realty. This is the COVID edition. And so Brian and I are back doing the podcast, doing the show. Very different circumstances though.
Yeah, welcome back. And we're actually happy to get back together and actually try to, give you guys hopefully some timely news that you can use to kind of steer all of these crazy trends that are going on right now in the real estate market, maybe even in the stock market. Um, we should have done it sooner, but we were busy and productively so. So we're very glad to be back, and hopefully you guys are still here to stay tuned.
Yeah, for sure. And so let's jump right into the very first topic here. And the very first topic is buyer representation for new construction. So Brian, you've done new developments and we're going to really pick your brain here on this segment. The one thing that's always really annoyed me about buyer representation during new construction phases is really the fact that a lot of buyers are signed up by their agent and then the agent disappears.
Yeah.
And then basically the contractor or their sales company takes over the entire process. One of the reasons I'm not a fan of that is because I really feel that buyers should get honest representation that looks out for their own interest during the transaction. So I think it's very important for that agent that signs them up to also be a part of that transaction. But why don't you give us a little bit more uh, about what you think about buyer representation on new construction, because you obviously have a different experience with it.
Yeah. Well, so the big question is buyer representation needed for new construction? Now, that question really depends on the timing and the cycle of the market. It's actually not physically needed, but why it is offered in many cases is depending upon the velocity or the absorption rate of the market, which is usually dependent upon all various types of outside terms. In other words, are we in a recessionary market? Is it a downturn market? In markets where everything is it's a seller's market and there's very little inventory and there's a lot of qualified buyers, in many cases it is not unheard of to see that there is no cooperative fee that's paid to a buyer's agent. And even in the case where they actually offer buyer co-op or buyer representation, the words buyer representation aren't necessarily utilized as much as the simple words of co-op. And what that is, for those who don't know, it just means that if you are an agent and you have a buyer and you bring your buyer in and you sign them up to a new development, we will pay you versus we will not pay you. And so if you look out there and you're a buyer, for example, and your perspective is as a buyer and you're seeing a new development that you are interested in and you see something that says co-op to buyer's agent, all that's simply saying is that, hey, we're having a hard time as a developer or the construction company that actually built this in selling and moving our units. And so therefore we are willing to even handhold you through the entire process, but to entice your buyer's agent who's representing you, which could be your cousin, it could be somebody you just met, somebody you're really close to that you trust, we will pay them. And the reality of it is that they will probably not have to do much because these new construction sites, they already have their standardized forms and disclosures, and they really don't need the agent except for in times where the market tends to turn. So again, you're going to see a lot of that because, for example, right now, financing is very shaky. Lenders are going to double check the underwriting guidelines 10 times more than normal because what they're looking for is that if the buyer that is applying for a loan will be employed in 3 to 6 months from now. You got to remember that from a seller's perspective, there are buyers out there who are trying to get into contract, close a deal because they're under the premise they might get a forbearance on their mortgage. So here they are, they're renting, not having to pay rent or having a forbearance on that. And then now they want to change their surroundings, so they're trying to jump off. And so because of that, lenders are more stringent and deals can fall apart. So therefore, you have less qualified buyers. And so what they do is just say, hey, agents, we know you have buyers for little to no work. If you can bring them out here, we will do everything and pay you. So physically, it's not needed except for in tough markets. And again, it's a barometer for how good the market is. It's just a matter of the timing. And right now, is the right time, and that's why you're seeing more co-ops being offered to buyers, agents, or in this case, buyer representation.
That's great. I mean, it definitely adds a whole nother perspective from a developer's point of view as to why you do certain things or offer certain incentives to buyer agents for that type of representation.
Yeah.
So one of our the very next topic here is with COVID, coronavirus, the normalcy is over, and agents are really having to modify how they do business and rely on technology. I know from the management perspective, we have completely gone to a virtual platform. We have eliminated in-person showings. We've upped Zillow tours, Matterport 3D tours, and I think right now we're the only management company in the entire Bay Area doing the actual 3D Matterport tours. And we've gotten a lot of great feedback, and it's allowing people to literally walk through a property virtually as it currently sits. And they're able to do this even on an Oculus headset, which is very cool, or one of the Google Cardboard headsets. And so they can walk through a property as if they're there.
Oculus headset right here.
Perfect. So it's an amazing, like technology is just amazing these days that allow us to basically showcase properties to so many people, and then they're able to complete applications once they see it. Once we approve a tenant, then we do a final in-person showing right before we actually sign the lease with them. So it's amazing how, one of the positive things is that this entire pandemic has really pushed businesses to adapt and really consume and use a lot of technology. And I think it's, for the most part, really good for the real estate industry that has historically tended to lack on technology.
No, for me, this whole COVID crisis and shelter in place, for the most part, it's been actually a very good thing, and primarily because of our embrace of technology. Prior to the whole shutdown occurring, I was using Zoom and a lot of the other video conferencing methods because I knew that I would be traveling around the world a lot on another venture that I embarked on, and that's movie producing. So anyhow, I produced my first movie, and I knew I was going to be gone a lot from October of 2019 to present. So I had my tech guy set things up, and I was able to still have meetings with all my clients. Many times in my office, I'll team up with one of my agents here, and we'll work these deals together. And we would meet with our clients just like this. And so when everything came into shelter in place, nothing slowed down for me. We just jumped right in. The hard part was having to mandatorily train all my agents to begin to use these new technologies that allow you to not be physically present. Now, that all said, there was obviously certain things that are need to catch up. So, for example, on signing documents or on loans, there's still a physical aspect that needs to be done. For example, appraisals or inspections. And so that's been a slowdown on that. And then that coupled with the fact that there's a huge unemployment rate, lenders have been making the guidelines for underwriting that much harder. But I think once all these things get, these kinks get worked out, you literally can conduct business, transactional business in real estate without ever seeing the property or ever meeting the person, right? Or shaking a hand for the first time.
Yeah, I do want to interject.
We learned that in the property management side. For those of you who don't know, Marc and I are partners. He's the lead on a property management company. And what was surprising is Marc will tell you, I'll let him tell you, our business actually has gotten better as a result of it. But why don't you jump into that, Marc?
Yeah, so going back to something you had mentioned, the technology in signing loan documents. That technology is actually already out there, but unfortunately, we need that adapted here in California. There's a few states that utilize that.
Segueing off what you just said, 10 years ago, when DocuSign first came into the market, or over 10 years ago now, Canada was fully capable of closing transactions within 3 to 5 days, and so was the United States. It is simply that banks and lenders do not like DocuSign or electronic signatures because it's untested technology, and they're afraid of the ability to forge, right? And so there's still different things that could go wrong, but there's different ways to make sure they don't go wrong. It's just that, like as you said, this time now we've been forced to do it. And so now in between video conferencing, sharing documents online that you can see just like through Zoom, um, and then now banks being forced to DocuSign a lot of things. I've seen loans where we've never met and I've signed them or my clients have signed them. But again, this is still few and far between. But I think, again, this is the trend of where it's going, where now you will be able to do this provided you embrace that technology.
Yeah, for sure. But this pandemic has really forced so many companies to become more efficient. Simply breaking down, when you're working remotely, it's very different. You don't have the ability to simply ask questions to your coworkers or your supervisors, your managers. You don't have certain um, ways to maybe, I mean, even printing out documents, for example, becomes very difficult because now you're forced to either print at home. And I know so many people that don't have printers at home, right? Just
Yeah.
something so simple, printer and paper, right? But it's really forced a lot of people to go online, look at online software, look at other remote solutions. And we've seen Facebook, we've seen Twitter essentially announce that they will start allowing workers for forever to work from home if they want to. And this is going to change even Silicon Valley entirely because what I mean, Facebook was spending so much money bussing in employees into their headquarters. Now, if they allow people to work from home, they're going to save money on just that busing. Now, it is going to be very interesting to see how that affects the local real estate market and the local rental market. And that'll be something that will probably take into effect in 6 to 9 months from now.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a number of technologies such as 5G, which will speed up the entire networks. In fact, I was talking to a client in China, and they launched their satellite, the Big Dipper, that's supposed to enable them to do 8G, right? Let alone we're just struggling along to get 5G. And aside from all the stupid conspiracy theories about what 5G will do, 5G should actually not only speed up how we do business, it'll speed up streaming, but it'll also enable a lot of the other technologies like augmented reality to take place. And
And automatic driving for vehicles because 5G would allow vehicles to communicate with each other to
correct.
to
Yeah.
basically create a whole roadmap of avoiding collisions.
Well, the way that the technology was intended to go, had we not gone COVID, shelter in place, was that you would have more autonomous vehicles and things of this nature. In fact, that's what China's satellite, um, translated as Big Dipper, this network of satellites is supposed to do for their country. Now, aside from the fact that right now China and the United States are not getting along really well, and there's talks about banning flights back to China. It's causing all kinds of complications. It'll probably impact the stock market, but for whatever reason, the stock market doesn't seem to be impactable. It's like the Terminator. You just, you shoot shelter in place at it. You destroy the economy. You increase unemployment. You create not only a pandemic but riots in the street, and it just continues to go up. Um, Anyways, that's a topic for another discussion. Aside from those things, the technology is definitely there. It has been there, but now as we're seeing, it's evolve or die. And the hardest part right now has just been the changing guidelines. So even though this was a technology that I was using before, and I always like promoted in my office, like for example, I've been using the iPad to sign documents so that it actually looks like a signature for the last 9 years. And a lot of times the bank can't tell that it was never paper because each signature and initial is a unique keystroke because it was done by hand, as opposed to DocuSign, which is clearly something that's just been stamped out by a computer or something that wasn't done in person. But now they're having to change their policies to allow for this. Now, of course, there will be those who will take advantage of it and create fraud. And again, that's why the technology will have to innovate further to create more security. But this is something that we should have done long ago, and now we're beginning to do so. And I think embracing the technology is not only good for business, but it also limits the amount of actual person-to-person contact unless it's intentional, right? So that, when you get cooped up at home, like we're all getting cooped up right now, and you just want to go meet your friend that probably doesn't have any communicable diseases at a coffee shop, then you can, right? But when you're conducting business, or you're like, for example, I meet with on business for people in Spain or Italy, and that's something I don't have to do and fly out to anymore, or in LA. And
Well, that's so you hit on a very important topic right there. Is that there's so many people that will begin doing Zoom meetings and virtual meetings after the pandemic is over, and they'll continue that entire process. And it's just a new way of doing business. Why travel? Why make all the effort to meet in person when you can quickly jump onto a virtual meeting, have that same face-to-face conversation, and then move on about your day? I mean, this entire uh, society with the pandemic, I think down the road will become way more efficient.
no, I agree with that. And to answer that question, because we're humans and we still crave contact. So at some point, to seal the deal, we're gonna want to meet in person. There are also certain things like construction, um, producing a movie, that you're gonna have to meet in person. Although there are some definitely innovative ways that are taking place right now, especially with the advent of the fact that people aren't going back to theaters anytime soon. And so a lot of the theater companies, movie theaters are suffering, right? But there are certain human traditions like live theater that you need to be there present to really enjoy. Um, Although, as the technology advances, it might change. Like I said, that's why I touched on augmented reality, or virtual reality, right? I was an early adopter of Oculus, now primarily for video games. I like to play video games, but there actually are business applications for it. And of course, now it's becoming more and more required. But for example, like, I'm a developer, so I've when I meet with my architect on different projects, we've always just met online. Now he uses GoToMeeting, and there's all kinds of these video conferencing programs out there. Zoom's just been on the spotlight because it makes things a lot easier to share. Skype, which was the early adopter, I think has gone away for the most part.
Google Meet is another version.
Yeah, well, for example, I offer Google Meeting to all my agents for free, and they barely use the damn thing. It's just, it really just requires the actual utilization of it. And unfortunately, there's huge groups of agents that are just not tech savvy, and either they don't want to learn, or they believe that they cannot learn. And unfortunately, that's something that has to change, or they're not going to be in business very long.
Well, now I think this conversation can allow us to segue right into the very next topic we want to discuss, is the prediction, our prediction of the future of real estate. I mean, where is the entire real estate industry going? And recently, the California Association of Realtors had a presentation by their CEO, Joel Singer. I had attended this online presentation, and it was very interesting to see a lot of the information that they've gathered. Many of it, people I've seen in the news. The biggest, the biggest takeaway I took from it is a prediction of home values coming up by the end of 2020. We're looking at anywhere from a 10 to a 15% drop in home price values, simply because of the demand dropping from buyers. And then what's kind of been holding up the values of homes right now is the fact that 50% of all listings have been removed off the market because people plan to put them back on the market once the shelter in place and the economy gets back up and running. The problem is you're going to have that lower demand created by the pandemic, plus an increase, a flood of new inventory properties. That is going to, simple supply and demand is going to create too much oversupply, and that's going to start putting pressure on the home prices and cause a downward trend. And so that was one of the big takeaways. I mean, for quarter two of 2020, we're looking at a minus 25 to a minus 40% GDP based on who you're listening to. But these top analysts, Goldman Sachs, and even the Congressional Budget Office, I believe they predicted 35% drop in quarter two GDP. So it's so what's your take on the real estate market? What do you see? And then if we're expecting the single family home market to drop, what do you think will happen with the multifamily market?
So again, you've heard me say this many times throughout our shows. This is actually my 30th year now in the business, and so I've seen these multiple up and down cycles. And it's very, you can do all the financial analysis you want, but at the end of the day, what it comes down to is these 5 and 7 year up and down cycles. So, for example, the last Great Recession took place around 2007, and we got out of it in 2011, 2012. So for me, 2012 was the turning point. You count down 5 to 7 years, and voila, we are in 2020. The economy was doing amazing, and then we go into this downturn as a result of having to go into shelter in place, a pandemic, right? So I always joke around. It's like, oh, I wonder what's going to take us out this time. Zombie apocalypse, pandemic, global financial crisis. It's always something, right? Comet. And so in this case, the market's going down, right? Why is it going down? Because of the amount of unemployment that has been created because of the shelter in place that was imposed. And because of that, many companies are simply not going to be able to come back. I mean, this is a long, drawn out discussion Marc and I have had. And unfortunately, those employees won't be able to come back. Now, fortunately for the Bay Area, a lot of the companies have been tech related. And so you have a huge mix of people that have continued to work because of their ability to adapt and work from home and use the cloud or use Zoom style technologies to be able to continue to meet. And so it's going to be an interesting thing, right? The Bay Area in itself still has very high incomes, and the majority of people that have been laid off, unfortunately, are going to be blue-collar workers that whose jobs, like if they're working at a restaurant, have gone away. Now, generally, what happens when this kind of stuff happens is that people from the Midwest tend to polarize and go to the East Coast, like jobs in New York and in jobs in California or the West Coast, because that's where the money is at. All right. I mean, if you've got an advanced tech degree or something that's usable in one of the economies that you might find in the East Coast, like New York or in California, then you're going to go there because those jobs simply aren't going to be available in the Midwest, right? You see some of that happening in Texas, right, where you have those types of tech jobs occurring and things of that nature. But people are still trying to come to California in spite of the fact that it's actually very difficult to do business here because of the taxation. So will the prices drop a lot come November? I mean, I think they should. All indicators say they should. But I think you're going to see a relatively quick bounce back. Generally, when people are not buying, people are renting. And so if you're a landlord and you're able to weather the storms, then you should be able to get through things. Now, what you have going against you, and again, I'm a landlord too, is the fact that the moratorium on rents is being extended beyond the 3-month period of the shelter in place. In fact, Marc and I, we were talking about like how perhaps in San Francisco, it might be extended all the way into January of 2021. And the significance of that is that we can't get the tenant out if they're not paying, right? But fortunately for us, most of our tenants have continued to pay. Either they're subsidized or they continue to want to pay because for whatever reason, right? Although we have seen other property management companies report as little as 50% or 60% rent collections. It really all depends. And it's an interesting time. It's very unprecedented, but the money, just like it moves in the stock market, will do the same thing in the real estate market. Wealth is transferred back and forth. And the ability for the big thing that I believe we have going for ourselves in California is the fact that a lot of these technologies that we're discussing right now that would make business more easy to do, such as augmented reality, virtual reality, teleconferencing, paperless documentation for transacting business. they're all right here. And so we are still able to continue to put our reach out there and provide these high paying jobs, which should bring the housing market back. Also, make sure to understand that the single family buying home market is not directly tied to the rental market. And as we've discussed in prior episodes, we expect California to be a 51% renter state, because so most people will be renting. And for new construction, which you see a lot of, which is what a lot of the higher paying tech jobs are gravitating towards, they're not, they have exemptions from rent control. They have a sunset period of 15 years. So that also provides other advantages. And a lot of these newer stock apartments will probably have amenities in place that allow you to be more COVID proof, right? Or be able to work from home, like higher speed internet or balconies and things of that nature. And again, why that's important is because, again, I'm a developer. I'm actually working on 2 construction projects for multi-unit apartments that I don't intend to sell off as condos. I want to keep them in my portfolio and just rent them out. So, for example, people being cooped up in the same place for so long, right, as everyone has experienced, they're going to want to be able to get out, right? If you're not living in a big house on a hill, it gets really difficult to go day to day when you don't have interactive contact with other people. So all of those play into the demand for the market, and why I believe that rents will still continue to hold. Ultimately, the higher end markets will be unaffected, whereas the lower end markets, you can expect to see drastic reductions in price. But now the lower end markets, keep in mind what that means in California. That's like $500,000, $600,000. You can expect those to drop maybe 500 or so. I'm sorry, not 500, drop 100 or so to 500,000, and vice versa, right? And that's what you'll usually see during recessionary periods, or what some are even describing as to what might be a depression. Sorry for that long-winded answer, but that's kind of my take.
Yeah, no, it's a very good perspective, and it's going to be interesting to see how the future of the real estate market. I mean, you hit a very good point that the majority of Californians will be renters. I think the original estimate was 2025. That might even be a bit sooner now because of the pandemic and possibly people losing their property through forbearance foreclosure in the coming years. So that process might be sped up. And so if the majority of the people are tenants, they will be looking for rental properties. And then at the end of the day, we still have not enough housing, right? And we've talked about this so many times that even if you have an exodus of people moving out of California for a variety of reasons, we still do not have enough housing. We're not building enough housing here in California, and that's going to keep those rent prices artificially higher, and that's going to keep building equities for the most part higher from an investment perspective. Now, let's talk about some of the issues in real estate transactions, because I know we've experienced a few issues ourselves, and other agents out there are experiencing transactional issues. Number one, appraisals. I mean, appraisals are becoming difficult. I mean, they were very difficult because we saw appraisers not wanting to go to properties. We saw appraisers wanting to sign forms that basically said they could sue people if they ever caught COVID. And who would they sue? Well, they would probably sue every homeowner that they've done an appraisal for. And we've even seen that entire industry change, because now you're having a lot more appraisers doing drive-by appraisals, or simply asking for agents or even the homeowners to do photos and tours, like virtual tours from inside of the property. So we're starting to see that entire industry change. One of the best out-of-the-box solutions I've seen are some new technology software bots. These bots take a photo and they're able to identify the exact material, the construction material within these photos. So if you take a photo of your kitchen and upload it to one of these websites, it will tell you what type of flooring you have. It will tell you the type of countertops, type of cabinets, and they can cross-reference with other photos of different kitchens to kind of gauge the difference in values and pricing. That's a very interesting model that I think is going to be rushed, and we're going to see that in full effect in the coming years.
Who's working on that technology, Mark? We talked about that before, and I actually
Yeah,
remember
there was a company that I saw them over at Indian Connect 2 years ago, and they did not have a presentation, but they were breaking down how their software worked. They were one of the panelists on the stage, and so I completely forgot the name of the company, but
I mean, if
they
you
were
remember the
working
name of
on
the company, I'd love to meet them. And if they need some extra capital to produce it, I'd love to maybe see if I could throw some capital their way.
Yeah, no, but it's a very, very interesting way uh, of doing appraisals, right? This would allow the homeowner themselves to take photos from the exterior of the property, the entire interior, upload it to a platform. The bot would then go through the entire, all the photos uploaded and be able to identify every aspect that an appraiser needs to identify. And so I've actually done a few videos of this in the past because I really think at some point down the road, we're going to see the appraisal industry automated. We already have automated valuation models, but the one issue is that they don't account for upgrades within the property.
Yeah.
So this bot would
I
simply
agree with
identify
you.
those
Yeah,
upgrades.
I agree with you 100% on that. There's going to be a number of paradigm shifts. One of them will be the way inspections are conducted, especially like appraisals. I mean, it's not actually necessary for an individual to physically go out to a building. Now, again, what I'm going to go into is very speculative, and it's just kind of my own assessment of actually seeing 30 years of evolution of the appraisal market, right? So if you look at the way appraisals were done in the early 90s, like 1991, it was a one-page document. The only thing an appraiser had to do was drive by the property, not look inside. And so what that did is it created the opening for abuses, right? So I'd get together with my appraiser buddy. I'd say, hey, there's a piece of land. There's no house there. Just drive by it. You don't even have to drive by it. Just say it's there. And there's a house there, so I can get a bank loan on it. And then I'm not going to make a payment, and the bank forecloses. And then they come out, and there's no house. There's a piece of land. Ha ha ha. These are actual real abuses that took place during the S&L crisis or savings and loan crisis. And that's why they went to a more robust form of appraisal, where they actually had to have someone go out there and look at the property. And then, of course, what a one-page appraisal turned into like a 50-page appraisal, complete with a not only a comp analysis, but also a insurance analysis, as well as a rebuild analysis and things of this nature, right? So building costs, someone they can hold accountable. But then, of course, other abuses came into place where I still know that person, and I can still talk to that agent or that appraiser and talk them into doing something illegal. Again, not me personally, but this is what other agents did. And so because of that, now the appraisals evolved even more, where real estate agents and even lenders are no longer allowed to meet the appraiser, right? So again, it's not that the appraiser needed to be there, but now let's look at the current time. People are afraid of getting infections and things of that nature. And appraisers can access and glean so much data, not only from Google Streets and Maps, but public records. They can get the dimensions. They can even pull up architectural drawings if they're available publicly. It's just that it's not as easy. However, like you described, usually they have to be there to see things like, well, types of materials it was built with. But if somebody is held accountable, like a seller taking pictures and saying, here, I hold myself responsible that this house actually is here. It's not some virtual reality manifestation or something that doesn't really exist. Then it's very easy to make banks comfortable with that type of an appraiser or appraisal conducted by someone who's still held accountable.
Well,
Right?
also, and also, a human can still be hired to simply do a drive-by and take exterior photos. So at least, if anything, they can confirm the building sits there,
Yeah.
and then they can just have the homeowner upload
Well,
the
not
photo.
even a human, but a drone can go out there and take a picture
True.
of, well, unless you get into where this other evil technology is occurring, deep fakes, right? That's when they actually, we were having this discussion before where, deep fake technology has come about where you can actually take an image of Marc and make him, look like it's really Marc and he's jumping out of an airplane and he's flying around and doing things, or seeing things like, that are very, very incriminating.
Well, they have audio deep fakes already.
Yeah.
And yeah, that entire world is crazy and a whole nother conversation in itself.
So I'm sure criminals will always innovate to do something bad, but at the same time, we have to innovate as well to get around certain issues that we get around now. Like, if we can reduce the amount of touching, then we will probably reduce which is the whole goal of shelter in place. Then we'll probably reduce the amount of spread of any disease, whether it's COVID or whatever the next disease is that comes out there that might be challenging or threatening the planet. But at the same time, the hidden impacts are less cars on the road, the environment gets better, yada, yada, yada. So it's all a big balancing act at the end of the day. You have to look at the big picture. And at some point, the corrections are available, and that's why you'll see the market begin to change again. But we are headed for this immediate downturn. I mean, let that not be a question. Right now we're in that little lull before the storm. Stock market's high. Things are still moving because inventory's there, but all the ingredients are here for us to hit that next down cycle, which, if you look at my way of looking at things, every 5, 7, 10 years, and now we're in that 8th year in 2020, we're hitting for that downturn, catch that wave when it happens, and ride it back up to the top. And we'll see we'll see what the next crisis is that occurs in 5 to 10 years when we get out of this one. This next downturn that we're heading for is what I mean.
Now, besides appraisal issues, we're also seeing financing issues. We are seeing Wells Fargo, Chase, perfect examples of how they've gotten out of the jumbo market in most of the jumbo loans they're doing. In fact, Wells Fargo came out and said they will only do a jumbo loan if you have 250,000 liquid cash in your bank account. Besides that, they won't touch your jumbo loan. Chase increased the credit score requirements to 700 from a 620 or 640 score. And they too are picking and choosing which loan packages to actually fund. And part of that's coming from a liquidity crisis with the banks. So for real estate agents, it becomes a matter of getting deals done and figuring out of the box solutions to get a deal closed. One of the things we're discussing in the transaction we have together that I think we're going to start seeing more and more is
seller carries and all-inclusive wraps.
Seller carryback.
Yeah. So to give a little bit of background, and again, what you'll find after doing this enough time, for 30 years, is history just keeps repeating itself. So what Marc was referring to is seller carries or all-inclusive wraps. Now, when this first became popular was in the early 80s. And the reason why is because interest rates were 18%. I remember my mom, at that time I was just like a kid, but my mom would leave her money in the bank and earn 18% or like 15% interest rate on it, right? And you could actually live off of that. Now, granted, what that did is to the housing market, if you left your money in savings and the banks do what they do, which is to loan down the housing market, they're charging a home buyer 18%. And most people couldn't afford that. So what ended up happening is seller carries on properties that were free and clear. But again, you ask, well, California, who owns free and clear property? So then the next evolution of that was what are called all-inclusive wraps, where it's acknowledged that there might be a first loan that a current seller has, but based on what you're buying it from them at, they have a certain amount of equity. So in order for that, like we're going to use $100,000 to make math very simple. If you're trying to buy a $100,000 house and you have 20%, which is $20,000, but you can't get a loan or you don't want the loan for the other 80% or 80,000 because the interest rates are too high or it's the guidelines are too stringent. In this case, the interest rates are very low. They're next to nothing because the government is trying to stimulate more movement, but banks are restricting or increasing their guidelines because they're afraid that somebody will lose their job, right? I mean, one of the reasons why Marc, or the criteria that Marc was touching on, is now evident is because banks don't know who's going to have a job in 6 months after they buy this home and make this huge loan, right? Understand that's the reasoning behind this. They're not just doing this and making it more difficult to get a loan because they're mean and dirty banks. There's a reason behind this. And so because of that, even though the rates are low and very favorable, you have to have all this money liquid, or you have to have a specific job that they believe will be around for another year or two, right? In fact, they're almost segregating down specific job classes. And if you fall into a certain job class that has a great likelihood of not being around, you'll probably be denied for that loan. So it's not the interest rates this time. So what Marc is talking about is that doing these seller carries, where the seller will carry the loan, you'll pay the owner directly and they will become the bank. Or if they have a loan themselves, let's say take that $100,000 model again, I have $20,000 or 20% to put down on a $100,000 purchase, and I need a loan for $80,000, but the seller owes $50,000 to a bank. I acknowledge that the seller owes that to the bank. We can't transfer the loan to my name either for whatever reason, because it's not assumable, which a lot of these loans explicitly say they're not assumable. Then I will pay the seller. The seller will collect a large amount of money equal to a payment on the 80% that I'm borrowing. And then they will be responsible to still keep that first loan of $50,000 in their name, make the payment to them. And so there's a number of acknowledgments or disclosures that have to be made, such as, hey, if you take me up on this deal, this is between us, and my first loan, who I owe $50,000, might frown on the fact that I changed title to you, because now the collateral has changed hands, and it makes it that much harder for them to collect in the event that you default, because they're going to come after me, not you, because you didn't sign the loan papers. Then it's an internal agreement that's created between a buyer and seller that allows for that. Now, by the way, some of these all-inclusive wraps, although they were popular in the 80s, explicitly also say that in specific loans that they're illegal. So, or a cause for default. So again, just be careful. But these are trends that are kind of still evolving, but these are the logical conclusions or directions that these things may go. And so now that we're, especially being in California, we're very litigious, and so we have to cross all our T's and dot all our I's, as well as disclose all the possible negative impacts on either side and get each side to agree. It'll just be a new form of this all-inclusive wrap, because in the 80s, when this was popular, banks didn't know about them, and so therefore they didn't account for them and didn't put into the promissory note clauses explicitly saying not to do it, right? So these different changes from all-inclusive wraps, seller carries, bank assumptions. In fact, I'm sure some banks might be willing to allow for an assumption, but then some banks may not allow for an assumption because they don't want to take the risk of getting a less qualified buyer on the property. So it's going to be an interesting thing out there as all of these things begin to evolve and change over the next several months. As
we're sure going to see a lot of trends coming back.
Yeah. But there'll be revised versions of old trends, right? It's kind of like bell bottoms making a comeback, but now they look slightly different or something, right?
So the bell bottoms of real estate transactions will come back. So
the bell bottoms of real estate transactions will come back. Yeah, we can use that as our caption.
So that's our episode for today. Thank you to watching Keeping It Realty, or thanks for listening if you're listening on the audio version on Spotify and iTunes. This was a COVID version. Everyone stay safe and catch us on the next episode.
Stay safe, stay healthy. See you next time.